Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto build harem with multiple girls, Temari Kurotsuchi Yugito Fume, Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Naruto was jolted awake from a strike to his thigh. He was stumbling on his bed halfway through a sad excuse for a fighting stance, delirious and tired by the time he realized his attacker was a girl a few years older than him smirking at him from the doorway to his room. On the bed was a remote of some sort, and the strike he had suffered felt distinctly remote-like. "You sleep like a rock," Kurotsuchi said in a deriding tone. Naruto sighed and started to rub the sleep from his eyes. "Why'd ya wake me? We're gonna be late for the announcement. Get your out of bed and downstairs." Naruto lifted the inside of shirt a smidge and sniffed, then immediately recoiled from the smell. It was absolutely toxic. And it made sense too. He'd been wearing those clothes for 2 days straight, hadn't bathed for a while due to him being on the road with Jiraiya and then in a house with 5 other women that he didn't know, and there was also the fight with Yugito, which got out of hand in a hurry. "Yeah, no, I need a shower." Kurotsuchi crossed her arms over her chest, deriding smile not slacking at all. "You're damn right you do. Better make it quick, though. It's almost noon." Naruto got up and stretched out his sore muscles once Kurotsuchi was out of his sight. "Wait a minute," he thought suddenly, going stiff mid-pose. "Who put my shirt back on for me?" He remembered taking it off to train and he remembered it was back on when he was on Yugito's back. Naruto shrugged. It's not like it mattered. He stumbled out of the room and went into the nearest bathroom, stripping off his clothes with slight consternation. The sweat had stuck them to his skin like an adhesive, and taking them off let a waft of stink to rise into the air. Without wasting another second, Naruto hopped into the shower and turned the nearest knob he could see, then let out a somewhat waifish scream as boiling hot water immediately pelted his body from above. That wasn't how the shower worked back at his apartment. Naruto started turning knobs which way made the boiling stop. He successfully made side jets spring to life, started and stopped the bath nozzle, and tinted the water with the refreshingly nose-clogging scents of lavender. "What the hell is wrong with this shower?" Naruto ground out, taking a few moments to get the water levels to his liking, or more accurately to where he could put up with them. And if that meant showering himself off with the lukewarm water from side jets while cloaked in the choking scent of flowers, so be it. He grabbed the nearest bottle with the word soap on its label and rubbed its contents on his body, basking in the glory that was the feeling of odor being washed down the drain. Ever since being on the road with Jiraiya, he couldn't help but obtain a newfound appreciation for being clean, especially when he had to deal with old man stink for months on end. Though that didn't mean he wanted to be in that cluster of a shower for a second longer than he had to. He stepped out as soon as he felt he was clean enough and nearly stumbled on the ground. Although a lot the aches and pains from his training session had vanished and he was less tired, there were still a lot of things that kept his physicality from being 100%. That, added with being in a boiling shower for too long, had left him woozy and unable to stand on his own. He grabbed onto the sink counter and held himself up as he stared into the mirror. Somehow, it hadn't fogged up, letting him see his face clearly. It was in that moment, while staring at his own face, logged down with water, and almost blacking out, that things finally started to click in place, for better or for worse. He was going to have to accept the reality he was in. He was going to have to accept that he was going to be living with Kurotsuchi and the rest of them. He wasn't going to find love. If he had any kids, they'd be kids from women he didn't even know. His freedom was restricted. He didn't even know how he was going to live his life from now on. It was probably going to change a lot, but how? Was he even to take missions anymore? Was he just a tool used to advance peace throughout the nations? He didn't know how he felt about those things. All those swirling negative emotions filled his brain as his body acclimated to the cold air. He didn't want to accept them. It was really hard for him too. But he had to, nonetheless. Just as the grips of cold reality were sinking into his heart, the door opened with a suddenness that jolted him out of his mind space. Kurotsuchi, squinting her eyes closed with an annoyed expression on her face said, "When are you?" before mumbling off as her eyes were attracted downwards, where they stayed for several seconds. Naruto, having never been peeped on before, went deer in the headlights at this newfound situation for a few seconds before realizing the girl was straight up staring at his, let's call it, delicate fifth appendage. He grabbed a towel to cover himself with one hand and grabbed the nearest soap bottle with another one, flinging it at her head on reflex. It clocked her in the forehead and she stumbled out, accidentally closing the door behind her with a comically exaggerated grunt. Naruto dried himself off as well as he could and fastened the towel around his waist. He grabbed his head and shook it a few times. It wasn't the time to be getting down in the dumps. One step at a time. One day at a time. Just because his life was the way it was, didn't mean he couldn't have fun with it. And it just so happened that he now had another thing he could tease the slightly older girl with. He opened the door with a shit-eating grin on his face. Kurotsuchi was still rubbing her forehead with a wince when he said, "Wow, didn't know the princess from Rock was a pervert. Now I know to time out my showers when you're not around." She growled, an embarrassed blush staining her cheeks. "I tried knocking and you didn't answer. What? Were you having an existential crisis in there?" Naruto's eyebrows furrowed. "What's an existential crisis?" Kurotsuchi huffed and picked herself up without managing to look him in the eye. Never mind. Let's just get moving, alright?" she said quickly. Naruto shook his head. This was going to be too much fun. "No way. Not until you apologize," he said, crossing his arms over his chest and turning his chin away from her. It was Kurotsuchi's turn to look surprised. "What did I do?" she asked incredulously. "What did you? Well, isn't it obvious?" Naruto asked with an outlandish flourish. "No, it's not." Naruto leaned over and got a little bit too much in her comfort bubble while staring her straight in the eyes. "You stared." The blush that had abated somewhat over the seconds returned full force. "No, I didn't," she almost shouted. Naruto nodded knowingly. "Oh, yes you did. And I'm not moving from this spot until you apologize." Her lips pressed themselves into a thin line just as fire erupted in her eyes. "I am not apologizing because I did not stare at your tiny little prick." Naruto leaned back and shrugged his shoulders. "Okay. If you don't want to apologize, that's fine." If Kurotsuchi was surprised he let it go that quickly, she didn't let it show. Her breathing began to get under control and she tried to say, Well then, if that's it. Unless," Naruto said, interrupting her. "That is, you want me to tell everyone that you peeked on me while I was, like a young pervert." Her mouth curled up in a snarl at the flip of a dime. "No one will believe you. So you admit it," Naruto said, pointing at her. "I admit nothing." Kurotsuchi all but screamed, her face starting to take a tinge of bluish purple. She looked like she was about to explode. And that wasn't a hyperbolic statement either. Naruto turned away, hand cupping his chin as he began to walk down the corridor. "Oh, I wonder how your dear old grandpa's going to react when I tell him you were raping me with your eyes while I was having an existential crisis. I can just feel the grandfatherly disappointment now." Putting aside the fact that he was using the term, existential crisis, without even knowing what it meant, Kurotsuchi's eyes widened and her skin blanched, turning the red blush into a sickly pink. "No. Don't do that." Naruto froze and swiveled around, smirk threatening to split his face in two. "You know, it would be pretty outlandish of a guy to accuse a girl of peeking on him. But you're scared of your grandpa knowing that you did for some reason. Are you actually a pervert? Is peeking on men something you actually do?" The blush took over the blanch again. Her brain was starting to short circuit. I'm framed. I was framed. That's all." Naruto scratched his head in confusion as the gibberish the girl was spewing. After a few deep breaths to recollect herself, she crossed her arms over her chest and, looking away, said, I'm sorry, okay. Oh, this was just too good. Sorry for what? Naruto asked, dragging the last word out. Her lips pressed themselves together into a thin line again. She started to murmur something out, but Naruto cupped a hand to his ear and said, I'm sorry, what was that again? Couldn't hear you. I'm sorry I stared at your. She shouted out in a burst, eyes pressed together. Now get some clothes on, you voyeur. We're out in 5. Maybe hanging out with Kurotsuchi wasn't going to be so bad after all. Making her mad was just too easy and too much fun. Naruto gave her a salute and continued walking down the hall. I'd hate to annoy the princess. And stop calling me princess. Oh 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 oh. Naruto put a hand on his forehead to block out the sun as he stepped out the door and onto the street. Was it still the same day that he got into a fight with Yugito? Didn't feel like it. Apparently Kurotsuchi didn't take too kindly to his dawdling in front of the door and shoved him forward down the steps with the heel of her foot. Naruto sort of expected something along those lines, so he managed to catch and right himself rather quickly. The best thing about it was that it gave him an excuse to launch a quip at her. Whoa whoa, princess. You're testy today. What's got your goat? Kurotsuchi, for her part, looked absolutely murderous. Walk, bastard. And don't call me that. Naruto dusted off the non-existent dust from his pants and jacket and looked back at her. Sorry, ma'am, your royalty, your highness, but the name stuck. You're princess for now on. Kurotsuchi almost stomped down the steps. Then think of another one, she ground out. Naruto shrugged. How about snatcher? Sniper? Phallic lock on. Kurotsuchi let her disgust show quite clearly through her face. Do you even know what phallic means? Shit for brains. Naruto nodded. Yeah, it means. Kurotsuchi huffed and took the lead. How the hell are you still alive? With the amount of people you've no doubt infuriated, you must be either made of lead or rubber to have made it through life so far. Naruto put both hands behind his head and walked forward with a kick in his step. Nope. Just gumption and stick-to-itiveness. And I'm more a pranker than a infuriator, you know. You just make too fun that I can't resist. Oh joy. Looking down the streets at the people milling about their day, Naruto realized that there wasn't any sort of hurry in their step to get anywhere. He'd thought that with the hurry he was awoken with, that they were already late for the announcement. What time is it, anyway? He asked. We left at 11:30. Kurotsuchi said in a deadpan. Naruto patted his decidedly empty belly. He hadn't had a substantial breakfast. Have ya eaten yet? Kurotsuchi slowed her walking so she could tilt her head and look at him with a single, wary eye. No. Ya hungry? Yeah, I guess. Dia wanna get something to eat? Kurotsuchi looked towards where the cage administration was. We're going to make them wait if we do that. Naruto shrugged. So what? The announcement's at noon, and even if we are late a little bit, they'll just stall the speech a bit with some bullshit. Pervy Sage is probably going to do it, too. He's really good at stalling for time. What if we have lines to say? We're not going to have lines to say. We're here so everyone knows that it's possible that the 6 of us don't kill each other. And you're really tempting me to prove their prior assertions right, by the way. Kurotsuchi mumbled coldly. Anyway, we're up there to wave and look pretty. That means we have lunch privileges. You hungry for anything in particular? He asked, deciding their course of action on his own. Kurotsuchi shook her head and pinched the bridge of her nose. Anything quick. Naruto gave her a megawatt grin. A woman after my own heart. To ramen we go. Come on. With that, Naruto launched up the rooftops and started jumping his way to his favorite ramen restaurant. Kurotsuchi took a second to shake her head and jumped up after him. Even if war erupted tomorrow and they divorced, their marriage was going to last too long. Way too long. She had to admit that being treated with a mocking hostility was refreshing compared to how people usually interacted with her back at her home, but it was the sort of thing that she only really wanted to experience once. Sure, eating exotic foods is nice when you've been fed only oatmeal your whole life, but when you start puking your guts out, you come to understand that things are exotic for a reason. It only took a few minutes to get to Naruto's favorite restaurant, a small ramen stand nestled into a nondescript street. It didn't look like it was bustling with activity or that it was all too different from any other ramen place. No advertisements of challenge meals or any shtick to speak of. She wondered why he seemed so happy to be going back. She found out almost immediately when he opened the flaps and was greeted by the staff like he'd been raised by them. Banter flew back and forth almost immediately with smiles and faux consternation abound. It took her a while to realize that the slight changes in the way he acted was his real self, him around the people he was comfortable with. Sitting next to him made her feel like a person who was witnessing something she didn't have a right to. Like a stranger invited to a party with only close friends who have known each other since childhood. For a few seconds, she felt no small amount of jealousy to the amount of ease and comfort with which they regarded each other. And then she remembered him mocking her for wearing a dress and threatening to tell her grandpa that she peeked on him. Any sort of deep thoughts about the nature of his character was put on the side burner for the sake of rekindling her already intense dislike for him. And you know, the old man said with his back turned to the duo as he scooped out noodles from a pot, that girl from Sand, the one that was down in the dumps, ended up taking the bill. You should thank her when you have the chance. Oh ho 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 ho, Ayame said with an impish eyebrow wiggle. And who was that girl anyway? Am I going to have to worry about more blonde-haired brats running around, making a mess of the village? Naruto laughed nervously and rubbed the back of his neck. Kurotsuchi couldn't be sure in the sparse lighting, but she could swear she saw a light blush pop up on his cheeks. He either had a thing for Temari, which was unlikely, or the ribbing that the young woman was giving him had started to become normalized and he was just reacting the way he did when he was a kid. From what Kurotsuchi could tell so far, the woman was kind of like a surrogate older sister and the old man filled the kindly grandpa role for him. Kurotsuchi allowed a devilish smirk to grow on her face. If she wasn't going to capitalize on this moment, then who would? Ah, Naru honey, Kurotsuchi moaned out in a perfectly acted out hyperbolic show of frustration. While she did that, she hugged both her arms around his bicep and leaned her upper body against his. He froze from the surprise mid-slurp and his face grew heated when she pressed her head against his. He also wasn't good with women touching him. Good to know. She filed that little bit of knowledge in the back of her mind for later. When are you gonna introduce me to them? She whined out with a much higher-pitched voice. She wasn't sure how it sounded to them, but her own eardrums were begging for mercy, so she could only hope that they were feeling the worst of it. While she might not have liked the curriculum for the female-specific tasks, she did find out that she was a natural Shakespearean from them. No role was too difficult for her to do. And the annoying girlfriend routine was practically second-hand by now from all the impressions her friends enjoyed. The noodles hanging out of his mouth fell to the broth with a small plopping sound. His eyes were wide open and his mouth was pressed in a surprised line, trying to keep all the food firmly in his mouth. He was surprised. Good. She was in control of the situation. He made a hard gulp and dumbly said, "Huh. Ah." Kurotsuchi fake-chided, putting a finger to the corner of his mouth, where there was a small dribble of broth leaking. She wiped the liquid up and said, "What did I say about table manners?" Switching to a slightly sultrier tone before putting her broth-soaked digit in her mouth. The girl made a show of making sloppy, licking sounds as she thrust the finger in and out of her mouth at a slow pace. That makes you a bad boy. And you know what happens when you're a bad boy. Kurotsuchi's eyes twitched over to the two ramen chefs for a quarter of a second. Their eyes were wide with their mouths hanging wide open. The ramen stand could be on fire and they wouldn't notice. Perfect. Just perfect. What are you? Naruto tried to get out a question before Kurotsuchi took the saliva-soaked finger away from her mouth and pressed it to his in a hushing motion. Shish 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 shish. Oh honey, darling, my love, why are you treating me so coldly? And after the sight you treated me to this morning. Ayame turned her head away and to the side as her cheeks lit up a crimson glow while Tuki went back to the broth, unsure of what to say or how to act in such a situation. Looking over to the two chefs' reactions, Naruto's eyes lit up with realization as he thrust his head away from her hand and looked at the now silent ramen chefs. His eyes pressed into lines as he glared at the she-devil. Oh, you she-devil, he muttered out. Without breaking character, she smiled a smile that would put Satan to shame and ed on her lower lip in a slow and sensual way as she growled out a playful mewl. Naruto slapped a hand on the table and said, this is just a whole big misunderstanding, he said desperately, trying to piece back together the respect of his pseudo-family that was lost from essentially bringing a whore to the dinner table. What's a big misunderstanding? Kurotsuchi asked helplessly. You said it yourself this morning. I'm just a pervert who gets off on. She didn't get another word out as Naruto hurriedly slapped a hand over her mouth and grinned nervously at the two over the counter as they tried to puzzle out the situation. Naruto was caught in between his inability to lie and his not wanting Ayame and Tuki to misunderstand the situation. Well, she's not lying, but she's not telling the truth either. Kurotsuchi wiggled out of his grasp. Ah, what's that supposed to mean, honey? Even after you made me admit my perversions, you're acting like this morning didn't even happen. That's because it didn't happen. At least not the way you're making it sound like. Kurotsuchi, still smiling like the devil, held her head in her hands and put her elbows on the table, looking to Ayame now instead. And what do you think happened, huh? Ayame started spluttering out in surprise, but was interrupted by Kurotsuchi. You know, Kurotsuchi tilted her head down and gave the ramen chef's daughter an knowing look. I can confirm that darling here has the largest chakra capacity I've ever seen in my life. Ayame's embarrassed face slowly turned to one of confusion. Wait, what's that supposed to mean? Naruto was looking at her too, not knowing where she was going with that one. Kurotsuchi's smile grew until it was nearly splitting her face open. She leaned forward and put a hand to separate Naruto's view of her mouth. It means, she whispered loudly so that everybody could hear, completely nullifying the utility of her hand cover, that he has a big D. Okay then, Naruto said loudly, slapping a hand over her mouth once more. This time though, he didn't let off and even dragged her to a stand away from the ramen restaurant. Thanks for the food, old man, just put it on my tab and don't be late for the announcement, he said as he walked off the restaurant with a patently fake smile, leaving behind two befuddled and embarrassed shopkeepers. Once they were far enough away, Naruto let his hand fall from her face and turned seriously to her. What the hell was that? Her smile had abated somewhat, but the evil was still there. You wanna play games, okay. Just don't cry when the tables are turned. Naruto raised a finger and looked like he was about to wax indignant before his digit lost its rigidity and his back fell forward. His face was a mixture of frustration and annoyance. He spat out a curse and straightened out his back. Okay, fair enough. I was okay with letting this stay as a one-off, but if you wanna play, then we're going to play. Now, where do you want to go now? His eyes were squinting and the smile on his face was a challenge just waiting to be claimed. Kurotsuchi smiled back. You're gonna help me pick out an outfit for the announcement. One of his eyebrows rose. Do we have enough time? She nodded. For what I'm planning, yes. Oh. Naruto's eye twitched something fierce. In front of him, in the store he had made fun of Kurotsuchi just that morning through a clone, were 5 or so women with their eyes wide open as they looked at something they couldn't believe. To be fair to his situation, he had known from the first sentence out of Kurotsuchi's mouth what her plan was. He had contented himself with the conviction that he could deftly get out of her machinations and put her in the center of embarrassment instead. Standing, having just had his transformation explosively undone and still wearing the sparkly, ruby red evening dress with matching high heels, he had to admit that he had underestimated her. Not only had she nullified the cloth shredding seal he always had on hand, which would have rendered her half in front of the patrons, but she had also maneuvered him in front of other shoppers before applying a genjutsu counter on his female transformation, leaving him cross-dressing in front of the women. When he changed clothes to that of a woman while he was Naruto, he had been planning on using it as a way to sneak the cloth shredding seal into the she-devil's clothes without her noticing. She noticed. She counteracted it. Then she counterattacked his counterattack. He quickly shuffled his way to the changing room, unable to speak to the women, much less look them in the eye, and stripped out of the evening dress like his life depended on it as soon as he was in a booth. It was only then that he realized that someone had taken his clothes. And so, he was standing in the box, in his underwear, with nothing left to put on. It was her again. The sound of barely constrained giggling was his only warning before the evening dress too was grabbed off the floor. He stood in that small changing room for all of 5 seconds, mind racing with all the things he could do to get out of that situation with his pride still intact, and came up blank. "Hey princess?" he asked feebly. "Yeah," she asked, barely able to keep herself from full belly laughing. "If I admit defeat here, will you give me back my clothes?" He heard her pace back and forth a few times, mulling over his proposal. "I don't know, that offer isn't really enticing, you know. What if I complimented you every day for the rest of your life?" She stopped pacing. "Oh, give me a taste and I'll see for myself if it's worth the trouble." Naruto had to bite the inside of his cheek from frowning too hard. It would have impeded his speech otherwise. "You are a goddess in human incarnate. I don't know, sounds a bit uppy. You are the most beautiful woman alive. Any man would be lucky to have you," Naruto said in complete monotone. "You're going to have to be a bit more enthused than that." Naruto ground his teeth together. "You are the wisest, smartest, strongest, most benevolent woman no human being alive. I am lucky to be in your presence. I would prostrate myself before you, but I have no room. If I could, I would start a religion in your honor." She chuckled a bit from outside the changing room. "Here's the thing, I can tell you don't really mean any of that stuff." Naruto practically snarled and opened the door with a suddenness Kurotsuchi was not expecting. He, while still only wearing his boxer shorts, walked up to her so fast that she started backpedaling on instinct until she couldn't anymore. She ended up with her back pressed against the wall and her arms full of the clothes Naruto had been wearing. He was close, almost dangerously so. A sudden jerk from either of them and they'd be touching in a most intimate way. For a few seconds, he did nothing but stare into her eyes, face stern, but not overly frustrated or angry. He leaned in even closer, the breath coming from his nose tickling her lips. She gulped hard and could feel sweat begin to percolate on her brow. Was this really happening? Did she push him too far? "You," he said slowly from the pit of his stomach, "have beautiful eyes." Kurotsuchi blinked once, twice, 3 times, before her voice came to her. What?" she asked. He looked down to the clothes in her arms. "Was that good enough?" I'm, what? The compliment," Naruto forcefully reiterated. Kurotsuchi's brain kick-started back into position. Her face was hot. Was she blushing? Why was she blushing? Hurriedly, she shoved the clothes in her arms onto him and stalked out of the changing room, where there was starting to be a small, somewhat entertained crowd of women standing around and leering at him. He gave them a happy-go-lucky smile, gave a bullshit excuse, and went back into the changing room. Oh. Kurotsuchi was waiting with her arms crossed over her chest in front of the building when Naruto exited as well. He had a bag with the store's logo in his hand. His face was sour and indignant. "They made me buy the dress, by the way," he muttered in greeting. "Apparently, they don't take too kindly to cross-dressing." She shrugged like it didn't concern her. "Are we going to administration now?" she asked, refusing to meet his gaze. He smiled like a sadist. "Not by a long shot." She glanced at him with equal parts apprehension and confusion. Oh 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 oh. Fua ow 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 Q Naruto Uzumaki I. Kurotsuchi screamed as she jumped away from ninja dogs doing their best to play, catch the rogue ninja. The Inuzuka clan member next to Naruto leaned his way a few inches and asked, "Are you sure this is okay?" Naruto nodded emphatically. "Oh yeah, she's always admired the Inuzuka clan. I think this is the happiest I've ever seen her. In fact," he said as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Once I get away from these mongrels, I'm going to tear you open 3 new assholes, then I'm gonna shove your head up all of them." "That doesn't seem physically possible," the Inuzuka muttered. Naruto shook his head. "No, it doesn't. Are you sure she's okay with this? It doesn't seem like she's too happy." Naruto nodded and clicked his tongue like he had forgotten to mention something prior in their conversation. "Yeah, she's a realist. She just doesn't feel right if she's not in character." The Inuzuka shrugged. "As long as there's no diplomatic incident and the dogs get their exercise." Naruto grinned. "I should start trying to apply that philosophy in my life. Simple, effective, straight to the point. I hope you get ball cancer. Aren't you cutting it a bit too close for comfort as far as the announcement's going?" Naruto asked, ignoring the screaming girl entirely. The Inuzuka member shrugged. "I'm not going. Probably not important anyway." Naruto nodded as he gazed at the girl from Rock, spewing philippics that would have made pervy sage cringe. "Yeah, you've got a point there. Oh 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 oh." Team 8, comprised of Kiba Inuzuka, Shino Aburame, and Hinata Hyuga, were all walking down the street on their way to see what the Hokage was going to say when they happened on a most peculiar sight. Right smack dab in the middle of the street, what appeared to be a man was hanging upside down from his feet attached to a lamppost. This man was covered in a layer of sticky tar with a layer of white feathers on top. On the crown of his head was tied a red rubber glove cut in such a way that the fingers were arranged in a mohawk-type pattern, and his mouth was covered by a party hat painted yellow with a black line going across it horizontally, giving a beak-like look to it. "Hey guys," the man mumbled. "Think you could help me down?" Kiba squinted at the man for a few seconds before seeing the whisker marks on his cheeks and his light blue eyes. "Shit man, is that Naruto?" he asked. The bugs around Shino buzzed for a few seconds. He gave a silent nod, confirming who it was. Hinata blushed up a storm as Kiba cut the wire holding Naruto's feet in place. He fell in a clump on the ground and got up with all the speed one would expect from someone covered in tar. Kiba crossed his arms over his chest and shook his head. "Should have known that the first time I meet you in 2.5 years and you're like this. Who'd you piss off this time?" Naruto puffed out his chest indignantly. "Don't think this is a one-way thing. I'm gonna get the person who did this to me tenfold." "I don't doubt it," Kiba mumbled. "So who was it anyway? He must have been pretty good to get one up on you." "She is," a voice from behind them said haughtily. The three of them turned around to see a triumphant-looking girl wearing the traditional shinobi wear from Rock. Kiba would have guessed she was a boy were it not for the clarification sentence she gave. No small amount of that was due to the tussed-up hair, clothing covered in dog bitis, wild look in her eye, and the overwhelming scent of Inuzuka clan dogs on her body. Kiba spoke to her, but her attention was squarely away from the dog boy. Instead, she was studying the girl with long violet hair, red face, and body language that said she was about to faint. And it had only started once she had been confronted with a tarred and feathered Naruto. That could only mean one thing. "Where are you guys going?" she asked the three of them, cutting Kiba off mid-sentence. "To the Hokage's announcement," Shino said without missing a beat, cutting off Kiba's follow-up indignant riposte. Kurotsuchi sauntered up to the still reeling Naruto, sidled up to him, and planted a quick kiss on his non-tarred cheek. "Well, don't be late, Sakura. The surprise is going to be great," she said just before body flickering the both of them away. The three members of Team 8 were, for their part, very confused. "Oh oh 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 oh." Naruto shoved Kurotsuchi off of him as soon as he could. What was that about? She stumbled away with her evil grin on full display. Wanted to make your girlfriend jealous, she said simply. Naruto's eyes scrunched in confusion. What the hell are you talking about? She looked at him quizzically. The girl with the long hair. That wasn't your girlfriend. Naruto shook his head emphatically. No, it wasn't. That was Hinata. And Sakura isn't even my girlfriend. This statement confused Kurotsuchi greatly until a flicker of realization came to her eyes. Oh, wait. Then does that mean this Sakura chick doesn't even like you? Naruto's visible cheeks colored red as he averted his gaze. Yeah, so what? We're teammates. Kurotsuchi covered her mouth to contain her laughter. Did you get friend-zoned? Oh, you poor, sweet child. Naruto growled and affronted on her, though she did not back up in the slightest. Don't talk about shit that you don't know anything about. It's more complicated than that. Kurotsuchi shrugged. Whatever gets you to sleep at night, she said as she turned her body towards administration. Seriously though, we should get going. We're totally late. Naruto clapped a hand on her shoulder and shook his head evilly. Oh no, we're making one more stop before we go. Kurotsuchi's grin rose as tall as his challenge. Okay. Better not cry to your mommy when I beat you though. Naruto's smile matched her own. My mom's dead. She shrugged. So is mine. Oh 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 oh. Kakashi's feet landed on the soft grass just before 3 wooden posts protruding from the ground. The field was nostalgic for all sorts of reasons and brought back many memories he would rather remain quashed in the small parts of his mind, but he wasn't standing in that field for them. He was standing in front of the 2 teenagers he had been looking for the better of 15 minutes. At least Naruto was predictable in some senses. He didn't know what he would have done if Naruto and Kurotsuchi were somewhere only they knew about. Though if it weren't for the scent of Naruto that he had become associated, he wouldn't have known it was him to begin with. Although most of the feathers had been brushed off, Naruto was still blackened with tar and now had pieces of twigs and leaves stuck to his body. Next to him was a vaguely human-shaped thing he surmised must be Kurotsuchi. She was covered head to toe in paints, primarily pinks and lavenders, and for some reason was wearing a tutu. The 2 of them were laughing between panting breaths as they laid against the same wooden pole in the middle. Kakashi sighed and took out his porn as he beheld the 2. Hello, Naruto, he said evenly. Naruto's attention flickered to the scarecrow, signaling cheerfulness to come out from hiding. Oh, hey Kakashi-sensei. How's the life been? I've gotten. Naruto paused and grunted as he brought himself back up. I've gotten a lot stronger over my training trip. I could take those bells all by myself now if I wanted to. Kurotsuchi crackled up with renewed laughter. Wow, you leaf ninja sure have some weird practices. Naruto turned around to look at her. What's so weird about snatching bells? Kurotsuchi's half-lidden eyes and slightly open mouth were indications of her being drunk off of laughter. She was absolutely giddy with herself. Oh, thought you said balls. Naruto cracked up laughing as well, making Kakashi almost sigh. And she wasn't the only one drunk off happy either. A lot of people are looking for you too, Kakashi tried to say as menacingly as he could. The blonde teenager in question shrugged. Yeah, I know. He offered a hand to the prone girl, who accepted it and pulled herself up. We're going. Kakashi shook his head and put 2 hands on either of their shoulders. Brace yourself, he said. Oh 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 oh. The 2 teenagers stumbled to the floor, sprinkling flecks of paint and smears of tar all over the ground. It was rather cramped, with all the world leaders, the members of the contract, and now Kakashi standing with his hands covered in either black tar or multicolored paint in the middle of it all. The faint booming of Jiraiya's enhanced voice could be heard up on top of the roof. As soon as he could, Kakashi's body flickered out of the room. Tsunade was the first one to move, standing Naruto up by the scruff of his collar and looking him straight in the eye. Where have you been? She asked furiously. Naruto shrugged in a show of mass disrespect. I got lost on the road of life. Tsunade growled at him lowly as she stared him in the eyes. He could tell she was deliberating between chewing him out right then and there and waiting for when there was more time. When she didn't respond right away, Fu stepped forward and asked, "What happened to you two?" With a worried quaver in her voice. Tsunade let go of him and stalked back to her desk while he scratched the back of his head with a toothy grin showing on his face. You'd have to be there to get it. By now, Kurotsuchi was up and at M2 with a comparative smile. But what really matters is that I won. Naruto scoffed. You wish, princess. She crossed her arms over her chest and leaned back a little bit. I literally tarred and feathered you. That can't be beaten. And I got you to fall into a Punjabi trap filled with princess paint. I think that's a top. Is not. Is too. Enough. Tsunade barked out. Transform so you two look like normal people, then get your asses up there right now. Naruto's and Kurotsuchi's spine stiffened and they both rose a hand up to their foreheads to salute. Yes sir, right-o. Out of earshot, I leaned over to Onoki and murmured, your granddaughter's excitable, isn't she? There was a mocking grin painted over his face which didn't need to be seen to be known. Says the man whose Jinchuriki had a meltdown this morning, Onoki quipped back. They both flinched when soft hands with iron grips clasped on their shoulders. Mei leaned forward with a death smile and lowly said, Era. Do I hear the gossiping of schoolgirls? It must just be me, right? There's no way that two heads of state could be measuring their s while in earshot of me, right? Onoki raised both hands in the air, not perturbed by the hand digging into his shoulder. I'm not the one who started it. Mei let go of their shoulders with a sigh. If this is going to work, we need to at least act cordial. Try not to keep score over whose girl is best. It's unsightly. Fu flitted over to them. What's going on? Nothing is going on, Tsunade said with barely restrained anger. Except for you six marching your asses up the roof and waving at the crowds while Jiraiya does his routine. Got it. Yugito puffed out of existence as she body flickered up to the roof where Jiraiya was. Tsunade pinched the bridge of her nose out of frustration. As a group, Temari was the next one to body flicker alone, causing Tsunade to sit down lest she begin a rampage. I'm just gonna go, then, if that's okay, Fu said quietly before puffing away. See ya, boys, Mei said huskily. She was halfway through blowing a kiss when she puffed away too. Naruto nudged Kurotsuchi in the elbow. Guess it's just us, then. She shook her head, saying, nope, just you, before puffing away as well. Gah, Naruto blurted out. She didn't wait for me. Go. Naruto waved Tsunade off. Yeah, I got it. I got it. Oh. The six of them stood side by side on top of the cage administration with Jiraiya's towering form directly behind them, going through a long preamble about the horrors of war and what could be done to take steps towards peace. The crowd under them were not just of civilian nature alone, meaning that the streets, the walls, the rooftops, antennas, pillars, and even a large bird were all used as purchases for shinobi to use. There was a sea of people, all with expectant, annoyed, or wary eyes directed towards what was happening. Many had guesses to how the speech was going to turn out, but not a single one was right. The Jinchuriki of the cloud, Yugito ni. The ones who have not faced off against her know at least her might. She is not only an accomplished kunoichi of one of the 5 great villages, but also one of the most powerful people alive, having mastered her beast's power. Jiraiya shouted out, beginning to name the people on the roof with grandiose. As he paused, there was a smattering of uneasy murmuring in the crowds of the people. The eyes of the people reflected equal parts awe and fear. Yugito shifted her weight from side to side. She didn't know how uncomfortable it was going to be being stared at by a whole village of people until it was happening. To her, all their eyes were searching her up and down, looking for any weak points that they could try to exploit. Her eyes flickered over to the end of the line, where Naruto was. His stature was straight and tall with a beaming smile on his face. He wasn't only okay with the attention, he basked in it like a cat would in sunlight. She had the feeling that if he was standing next to her, she'd be able to rest easier, prompting a particularly lascivious assault from the demon in her body. Daughter of the previous leader of Sand and sister to the current leader, Temari no Sabaku. Not only of a noble bloodline and proud posture, this girl, no older than 18, is one of the youngest Jonin among the Sand population of shinobi to attain that rank and has mastered the usage of wind arts to a degree few ever have. Temari was used to such gazes. Not only from the people staring at her on the streets, but because she was sometimes invited to the speeches her father gave, few that he did. She had been shy the first few times, but had grown used to the stares over time. As she looked down and back at the people of the leaf, even recognizing a few of them, a strange flicker of hope began to kindle in her chest. There had already been hiccups aplenty, but if the contract worked as intended, it could mean a demilitarization of the entire continent. It could mean that a profession that included lying, cheating, stealing, and killing would no longer be looked up to as a noble one. And besides, her day-to-day had been, until then, sorely lacking the sort of unrestrained joviality that Naruto often brought along with him. It could be a nice change of pace to travel with such a man. Jinchuriki of the waterfall, Fu. Unknown to many as she had been sequestered in her village as a deterrent and a defensive weapon. Along with Yugito, also one of the most powerful people on the continent with an impressive host of abilities rare for even a demon host. Fu smiled brightly and clearly for all the people in front of her. She raised her hands high above her head and waved them back and forth. A small cheer rang out from somewhere in the crowd, followed by another, then another, then another, until there was a small roar of applause and cheer from them. Considering the amount of people there, the noise was lackluster, but it lightened many of their spirits. Her spirit, which only possibly matched their own Jinchuriki's, was infectious. The girl wasn't sure about the prospect of universal peace. What truly excited her was the idea of traveling across the continent with people who could have understood her plight even marginally. Even if most of them were downers, it was going to be fun being with them. Especially Naruto and now maybe Kurotsuchi. They looked like they knew how to create their own fun. Exactly her kind of people. Leader of the rebellion against the Bloody Mist, Mei Terumi. Having mastered 2 different types of bloodline releases, she has led a new future to her village. Already, her populace has praised her for the practices she has put in place. Another one of the most powerful people on the continent and a born leader. Mei smiled serenely as she waved to the crowd sedately. She'd been through the rigmarole of addressing populaces and had every part of her body perfectly practiced towards lifting the people's spirits. A whistle rang out from the audience, making her smile draw upwards ever so slightly. Soon, there was more whistling, though this was quieted much more harshly by the attending partners of the whistlers than Fu's exuberant waving. Granddaughter of the current Tsuchikage of Rock, Kurotsuchi. With a bloodline limit of her own that she has mastered, she has won the hearts of the people of Rock. Noticing that that was all the introduction she was going to get, Kurotsuchi turned back at the man and gave him a death glare, not that it made him falter all too much. She turned around suddenly, stomped up to the railing, put a foot on the top and struck a single fist in the air. "Let's hear some noise," she shouted out at the top of her lungs. At first, there was only stifled laughter in the audience, but there was soon a raving cheer going across the sea of people. People began to compete with how loud their voices could be, and even stark haters of Hidden Rock felt a light grin tug their lips. She crossed her arms and stomped her way back in line, leaving a line of colorful paint on the ground unseen by the people. As soon as she was back next to Naruto, she nudged him in the shoulder. "Beat that," she said in challenge. He grinned. "Oh, I will." Naruto Uzumaki. Many of you all know him as a prankster, a hell raiser, a loudmouth, or a little brat. Naruto turned back and gave the old man the stink eye. Jiraiya had to pause as a slight chuckle overcame his seriousness for a second. As soon as that happened, There was a smattering of laughter among the audience too. Jiraiya straightened himself out and put his serious mask back on. And yet, many of the people here today have heard of him. You have seen him during the Chunin exams several years ago. You've heard tales of his exploits, of his relationships, of his very goals, with doubt and disbelief. But any of you that have met him know about him. You know that he will be the last one to give in. He won't ever give up, because that's his shinobi way. That's the way he lives his life. He's grown now and has been trained by myself all the way. The reason for this training is to help him contain the nine-tailed demon fox sealed in his gut. And just like that, there was silence in the audience. From disbelief and confusion from the younger generation and shock from the older. Thanks to the silence, Jiraiya's voice was all the more louder. Many of you already know this, but the younger generation does not. Naruto Uzumaki had the Kyuubi sealed in his gut by the fourth Hokage, Minato Namikaze, with the help of his wife, Kushina Uzumaki. That is the way that he defeated the Kyuubi, as a tailed beast can never be truly defeated through conventional means. Kurotsuchi felt her stomach tighten up. All of the sudden, there was a constellation of dots in her mind, trying to make connections as fast as she could and not liking the result that they were coming out to. And if any of you are wondering what happened to the fourth Hokage's secret wife, Kushina Uzumaki, well, she died protecting her newborn son. Everyone's eyes grew in the audience at the reveal of this new information. A few had already figured out what Jiraiya was going to say next, but most were just too shocked by the information to do anything, Kurotsuchi included. But worry not, for her son has survived all this time. And his name is Naruto Uzumaki. Kurotsuchi's stomach twisted itself in knots. She couldn't move anymore. She couldn't think anymore. She couldn't even hear the cheer raised throughout the crowd as Naruto incited more excitement than she ever could. She didn't see the triumphant smile on his face and she didn't feel the nudge against her shoulder from him. There was no jutsu entrapping her thoughts and movements. The chains that bound her were securely made from forged and hardened rage, long thought to have been bottled back in the recesses of her mind, only to find it brought back with enough force to temporarily paralyze her body. Jiraiya began to lay out to the plan of the countries, but she didn't hear them. Eventually, the leaders of the respective villages popped up there behind them, but she didn't feel them. Naruto leaned to the side and asked if she was okay, but she didn't even notice him. She couldn't. How could she? How would she? Because she was standing next to the son of the man who killed her mother. She snapped back to reality when she felt the cold, withered hand of her grandfather grab her elbow suddenly. Her breath got caught in her throat and her spine snapped straight. "Don't make a scene," he hissed so lowly that it was only audible to her. The sound of her teeth grinding together assaulted her inner ears. She couldn't unclench her teeth no matter how hard she tried. Her face was screwed up in anger, though she doubted anyone noticed. All the people in the crowds were looking at each other or milling about with any number of differing emotions on their face. She only had one emotion available to her. "But Gramps, if you make a single sound more, I will make you so heavy that you won't be able to stand for weeks." Kurotsuchi bit back her tongue and closed her eyes. She felt a hot wetness on her cheeks. Was she crying? Too many emotions that she had thought were long gone began to bubble up in her chest. Sadness, anger, frustration, fear, doubt, and above all, helplessness. As she glared at the teenager next to her, him waving out to the crowd and blowing raspberries in an utterly humiliating display of juvenility and childishness, Kurotsuchi felt the most intense sensation of helplessness well up inside of her. No, that's not right. She wasn't helpless anymore. She was a young adult now. She could do whatever she damn well pleased. And it would damn well please her to shove a katana down his throat and look him in the eyes as he choked on his own blood. Oh, it would please her greatly. Oh. Mei, being the one standing on the other side of Kurotsuchi, was the first one to sense the incredibly fluctuating chakra signature to her side. Mei glanced over and saw streams of tears pouring out of the girl's eyes like miniature waterfalls and a face that was more tortured than many of the people she'd seen dying on the battlefield. Something was very wrong. As soon as she noticed this, she walked up behind Jiraiya and quietly said, "We have a problem," interrupting his speech mid-sentence. Without changing his facial expression in the slightest, Jiraiya nodded ever so slightly and immediately pivoted away from the point he was making with promises of more minute details trickled down by the elite shinobi. By the time they had turned around, there were only 4 members of the contract standing in a line. Kurotsuchi was gone, having brushed past her grandfather, leaving him flat on the ground next to a confused Naruto. "What's going on?" he asked, looking over to where he had last seen Kurotsuchi's fleeing form. Jiraiya took charge of the group, saying, "Everyone, body flicker down to the room right now," in a stern and domineering voice. The leaders and their charges paired up without a second buffer and vanished from the rooftop, leaving a citizenry confused as to what happened. Soon, they would begin to filter back to their homes with confusion, doubt, and trepidation in their hearts. Never before had something like this happened. Never mind a 6-way marriage, few remembered a time when 5 Kage were in the same general vicinity and there wasn't a war going on. The general populace would debate, argue, and whisper in hushed tones as to how they thought it was going to shake out. There would be 100 different conspiracy theories by the time the sun set and 100 more by the time the sun rose. Some could agree, some were indifferent, and others still couldn't accept allying with any of the other big 5. The next week or so were of vital importance to the people's perception of how things might shake out. Oh. Naruto almost stumbled forward, but he was held steady by the grip of Tsunade. As soon as Onoki was down, she said, "What's going on?" with a hint of frustration in her voice. Things had been going so well. What could have happened to exacerbate the ire of the girl from Rock? Honestly, it was that girl that made her the most worried for the future of the alliance. The rest were either staunchly pragmatic or indifferent to the contract, but Kurotsuchi was excitable and acted on emotion in a way not wholly unreminiscent of the teenager whose shoulder she was grabbing. So when Kakashi brought the 2 of them in front of her, covered in tar and paint, but laughing thereof, she couldn't help but feel a load lift off her shoulders a little bit. If they could work things out, then maybe peace could be achieved. Now, the weight came crashing back down, heavier than ever. Onoki brushed himself off grumpily and stood as straight as his age would permit with his arms crossed over his chest. "Oh, don't tell me your spymaster didn't tell you about this. Anyone who's anyone knows that there's been an impromptu Kage meeting since a few weeks ago. If your spymaster doesn't know what's going on, then he isn't worth his salt." Tsunade desperately wanted to admonish him for shifting the topic of conversation, but she knew that there wasn't time for that. Instead, she turned to look at Jiraiya and lifted an eyebrow. He splayed his hands to the side and shrugged. "Of course I knew that there was a meeting in Leaf, but I had no idea what it was about. I only just managed to pull up dossiers on the 5 women and I only had about half a day to do it." "And?" Mei asked. "And what?" Mei sighed. Since his lordliness, she pointed at the grumpy Onoki, who was turning his head away from all of them. "Isn't talking. What do you know about her? She was fine when she got up there and suddenly, her chakra went wild." "Wait, what?" Naruto asked, interjecting himself in the conversation. "Why did that happen?" "That's what we're trying to figure out, kid," I muttered. "Well, it has to be something you said, Jiraiya," Shibuki said. "There's nothing else that could have happened to have upset her so." Everyone turned to look at the slight man, making him almost flinch. He wasn't used to speaking out too often and everyone in the room had a sort of unassailable vibe going around them. "Well, Jiraiya," Tsunade said, turning to him. "What did you say?" His face had been screwed up in concentration for a little bit when she looked at him. "I don't know. Her introduction wasn't as long, but I couldn't find anything as noteworthy as the others." And she wouldn't go bipolar over a shortened introduction, Temari quipped. Perhaps it was something to do with Naruto's introduction. Gaara put forward. If it was happening around that time, then it might not have had to do specifically with her. Jiraiya looked like a man scrambling for his own sanity. But I didn't do anything then either. I introduced him to the populace, made them feel for him, then I told them. Jiraiya began to trail off as he began to make connections between what he thought were once disparate facts. He turned to Onoki, who was still shoving his nose the other way. The old man's refusal to speak wasn't just due to his stubbornness. He was ashamed. Onoki, Jiraiya said lowly. You didn't. I didn't have any other choice, child. Onoki shouted. There was no one else eligible other than her, and I made sure that my son wouldn't tell her the truth. Well, it looks like that went by swimmingly. Jiraiya shouted back. How could you think this was a good idea? I didn't have any other choice, child. Onoki reiterated. You think I wanted to do it this way? Anybody else would have flat out refused me or tried to kill him. At least this way, I had some control over her. Except it looks like you don't, old man. The contract was originally made 16 years ago, child. Hey. The room went quiet at the sudden outburst from Yugito. Her mouth was curled in a snarl and her eyes looked murderous. I, for one, am quite annoyed at being left out of the loop. Would you kindly explain to me just what's going on? Onoki crossed his arms and turned away from them while Jiraiya pinched the bridge of his nose. Kurotsuchi's mother, Jiraiya breathed out, died in one of the battles. Naruto's father was present. She didn't just die while he was there, Onoki spat out. She was killed by his hand. The room went quiet as the inhabitants digested the meaning of what was said. Naruto was struck so hard by it that his knees fell out from under him, forcing him to sit down in a chair. Fu's eyebrows scrunched together. That's Ed, Temari finished. Like, really, Ed? May crossed her arms and huffed. Oh, please. This continent has been ravaged by war for so long that everyone has buried their friends or loved ones. Honestly, she's being quite petty. Have you ever lost anyone? Yugito asked. May's eyes narrowed as she looked at the militaristic woman. Is that supposed to be a joke? I grew up on a battlefield. Of course I've lost loved ones. And I bet no one asked you to marry the son of the ones who killed your friends. May waved it off. The sins of the father should not carry on to the son. It shouldn't matter what his father did to her mother. Especially not when the balance of the world hangs precariously over the tides of war. Even so, Yugito offered. Would you be able to marry the son of a man who killed a person you loved? May tapped a finger against her elbow rhythmically. If I had to, she gritted out. Yugito closed her eyes and sighed. Well, it doesn't sound like Kurotsuchi lived on a battlefield. Any of the fighting she did, I doubt it was to destabilize the balance of the Big Five. At this point, she's actually rather naive to how the world works. Can you blame her for running? Yes, I can, and I will. Even one naive as her has to know how important this is. May took a moment to take a deep breath and collect herself. I doubt we were the only ones who saw her outburst. Why are we even debating over this? We should be trying to find her. Naruto stood up suddenly, a resolute look shining on his face. You're right. We should go. Split up? Fu asked. Or maybe a tracker. She trailed off as she saw the fleeing tail end of Naruto burst out of the door and down the hallway of the building, an idea of where to find her already in mind. No. Ah, shit. He's gone. Tsunade turned to Jiraiya. Do you have any tracking toads? He nodded, already biting his thumb. Yup, he said, before slamming a palm on the table, releasing a puff of smoke and revealing a small toad smoking a pipe far too large for it. Ah, boya, whatcha callin' me out here for? Do you smell the paint? He asked. The toad grew indignant. What'd take me for? Of course I can. Well, Jiraiya said, showing the way. If you'd lead. The toad sighed and got up. One could practically hear the creaking of his joints. Okay, off we go, he said before jumping off and landing on the ground. A few seconds went by before he jumped again, making it to the door. He turned around, eyeing everybody. What are you waiting for? Tsunade leaned over to Jiraiya. Should we just call Kakashi? I heard that. The toad shouted. Ain't nothing a dog can do that a toad can't. Now get your in gear. We're going turbo drive, the toad said before jumping out the door and into the hallway. This time, only a second passed before he jumped again. By shinobi standards, he was moving a snail's pace. Tsunade pinched the bridge of her nose. I swear, on one side, I'm pressured by shady, backdoor dealings of dubious moral nature, and on the other, it's incompetence on the greatest level. Jiraiya sighed into the palm of his hand. I know. I'll call a faster one next time. I heard that. Oh. Naruto burst out of the tree line and into the grassy meadow breathing hard and his mind in turmoil. The sun hit him like a brick to the face and he had to shade his eyes quickly. He'd been running through the trees for a good 5 or so minutes before he came to where he wanted to be. To his right was the rest of the meadow and a large tree overhanging a medium-sized pond, and to his left were 3 wooden poles firmly stuck in the ground. On top of the middle one was a hunched-over individual hugging her knees to her chest. On the pole next to her was a katana stuck sliced into the base of the wood. He opened his mouth to shout out to her, but as he took a step forward, his foot squelched on the ground. It hadn't rained for days. There shouldn't be mud. When he looked down and lifted up his foot, there was purplish pink paint stuck to the bottom of the soles. His visage went grim and a frown marred his face. Looking at the paint made his stomach queasy because just minutes prior, he had associated that paint with the laughing grin of Kurotsuchi. She was a strange, brusque, rude, and abrasive person. But the more he talked to her, the more he found her personality to be infectious. There weren't many people he could let loose around. In fact, other than maybe Shikamaru, he always found himself holding back a part of himself when interacting with people. He had just met her and they grated on each other's nerves, but he couldn't find it in himself to dislike her. They were alike in too many ways. And now, with the paint staining his foot, he realized he didn't know what he was going to say. What could he say? How could he say it? How could he say sorry to the fact that his father killed her mother? He didn't want to hurt her. He wanted to talk with her more. He wanted the marriage thing to go well. He wanted them to be friends. Instead of shouting out her name and running towards her like his body had been telling his mind to do, he instead walked toward her in a more sedate pace. He didn't sneak up on her or try to mask his presence. He just needed time to figure out what to say. He couldn't find them, not the words, nor the way. So when he stood behind her, mouth agape and throat struggling to find words, he felt like an idiot. He always knew he wasn't the smartest of the bunch, but it was only then, standing behind someone who was hurting because of him, unable to apologize or even to say anything, that he felt well and truly like an imbecile. Like Adobe. Maybe Sasuke was right all along. How could he bring back the Uchiha if he couldn't even find the right words? Naruto took a deep breath and hopped up on the other stump next to her. He was on her right and on her left was where the katana was stuck. He looked up to the sky with the birds chirping and the leaves rustling in the breeze. He could feel the wind on his arms because he had shucked away his tar-logged coat a while ago. It still covered his legs and other bits not covered by the coat, but at least it was possible to move that way. Since her clothes weren't stained anymore, but paint was still stuck to her skin, he could only guess that she ran to the house for a change of clothes. Why wasn't it raining? Why wasn't the sky crying? Why did the birds chase each other around without a care in the world? Couldn't anyone but him see the pain the girl was in? No, he was the only one. The only thing that could comfort her in that moment, and what was he doing? Nothing. Not a goddamn thing. The weather's nice, Naruto said lamely. He didn't know what else to say. There was nothing else to say. Everything from the quiver in his voice to the words he chose told her everything she needed to hear for her to understand. And even so, she said nothing. Her eyes were dead and they didn't see the world. There were unwiped hair tracks on her cheeks. He took a deep breath and said, "I'm." The sound of a blade being pulled from a stump and the air being cut. He blinked and there was a sword digging into the skin of his throat. "Don't say it," she said. "If you say, I'm sorry, I think I just might have to cut your head off." Naruto put a finger on the dull part of the blade and pushed it away from his throat. He started to scramble for words. What could he say? What? I didn't have many friends growing up. Can you believe that? It was like the strength to hold the sword vanished from her arm. It fell to the ground where it sunk a few inches in. Naruto nodded. It was, I don't know, maybe you didn't have friends either so you can relate or something, but it was hard, for me. I didn't know why the parents didn't let their kids talk to me. So it was hard. It was, it was because of the demon sealed in my gut, but I didn't know that back then. I thought it was just because of me. I didn't have parents to tell me I was special or really anyone to comfort me, so I wanted attention. He looked to the side to see if she was still paying attention. Her eyes were open, but he wasn't sure if she was listening. Even so, he continued on. I used to do so many stupid things to get attention because when people were looking at me, they were acknowledging me. It was like I was invisible unless I pressed their hand. Being looked at, even if it was with annoyance or malice, it made me feel like I existed. And then, when I was older, like, only about 3 years ago almost, I met someone who looked at me. The real me, not the one that everyone else saw. I think I only really realized it when he put himself between me and a giant shuriken before telling me to run away. I realized that I could exist. And I started to make more friends who looked at the real me until it didn't feel so bad sleeping in an empty house anymore. It would always hurt though. And that's why, now that I think about it, this whole thing. It might not be so bad anymore. I can have a family. In a real up way, but still. I can wake up and talk to someone about nothing. I can go to bed knowing I'm not alone. I can, Naruto sighed, hanging his head down. I don't know where I'm going with this anymore. But I don't want to hurt you. Kurotsuchi's face contorted on itself. Her face went red and a new wave of tears welled up behind her eyes. She reached down, grabbed the sword, and swung upwards, stopping at his throat again. Her arm was shaking, leaving a few angry red lines on his throat and beginning to stain the edge of her sword red. I want to hate you so bad right now. I want to be able to watch you bleed out on the grass and spit on your bleeding, corpse. You weren't the only one who had it hard. My dad had to raise me by himself because of your dad. When he was away on missions, I had to be taken care of by the neighbors and they treated me like glass, like a precious doll. Do you have any idea how many times I wanted to scream and bite and tantrum every time they snuck off to a corner where they thought I couldn't hear them and whisper, "Oh, poor girl, mom got stuck by the fourth Hokage, such a terrible thing," and to the granddaughter of the cage too. The tears fell out of her eyes like a river and a sob choked her throat. Everyone, they ate up to me. Their smiles were fake. Their tears were fake. Their words were fake. Everything about everyone and everywhere was fake. And when I was in an empty house, crying myself to sleep, the only thing I could think of was a mother I don't even remember the face of. And I remember hate. Her arm fell down again and her face slackened, though it wasn't due to an emotional mask she put on. Just the process of showing emotions was too taxing on her. It took too much energy. Everyone hated the fourth Hokage, but I hated him the most. It didn't matter if he was dead because I would always hate him for taking something away from me that I never even got to understand. You think you were alone? Well, so was I. Naruto's nose flared up. What the air you talking about? You have a dad. You have someone who loves you unconditionally and would never let you go. You have someone who would cry if you died. You're not alone. I didn't have any of that. He screamed. Kurotsuchi's nose flared up too. You can't understand the pain I've been through. Everyone always trying to take advantage of me. Everyone never meaning what they say. I was worse than nothing. I was subhuman. I was a stepping stone. A way to better people's careers. And you also had people who loved you. I didn't. And it wasn't my mom's fault for that. My mom didn't take anything away from you. My mom didn't put a ing demon in your gut. My mom didn't do a single goddamn, mothering thing wrong. So why did your dad kill her? I don't know. I never knew him. He was just the guy who put a ing conglomeration of evil and hatred in my navel and pieced out. You think I love my dad? I didn't even know who he was 2 days ago. I don't know why he killed your mom, but hey, guess what? She's not coming back. Kurotsuchi looked like she had been struck in the chest by a club. The shock on her face was soon replaced with a snarl. The did you just say? Naruto slouched, all anger evaporating from him like a pan of water left out on a hot day. Nobody's coming back. I can't change that. You can't change that. Nobody can change that. I can't apologize for something that my dad did, but I can say one thing. He looked her straight in the eye, expressing all the sadness, anger, and fear in those eyes of his with one look. I like you. And I don't want you to be hurt. Her breathing became staggered. Anger was choking her throat. She screamed like an animal and pounced on him, pushing him off the log and onto the grassy floor. She put her knees on his shoulders and punched him in the face. The first one hit him like a rock. Kurotsuchi's eyes widened at the realization of what she'd done before anger took hold once more. Her fists fell on his face like hammers. His features were soon slick with blood and puffed up from the bruising. That didn't matter to her. The blows kept raining over and over and over. Even when there was no strength in her arms and her knuckles were ripped up and she was sobbing uncontrollably, did they stop making any damage? She had to palm the grass with both hands to keep her torso up, so she couldn't do anything to stop Naruto from spitting out a wad of blood and turning his face to her. His eyes were swollen shut, so he couldn't see anything, but she got the feeling that he knew where her eyes were. Do you feel better? He asked scathingly. She took a few shaky breaths. No, I don't. Her voice was measured and even. Sense was returning to her. Get off me. It wasn't a question or him asking her to. There was no please or thank you. He was not gentle in saying it and he was not kind. Kurotsuchi nodded and backed up until her back was pressed against the log with hair in the ground. She pulled her knees to her chest and rested her forehead on top. Naruto sat up too, opposite her. So? He asked. Kurotsuchi didn't look up. So what? He sighed and laid back down. His face hurt just from talking. That girl packed a punch. So are you still in this thing? She was done. Exhausted in every way that could be defined. Yeah, sure. Naruto got up to his feet and slowly walked towards her before extending a hand. Can you get up on your own, or do you need help? Kurotsuchi raised her head from her knees and stared at the hand. It was rough and calloused. A hand that only knew hard work and determination. It was attached to the son of the man who killed her mother. It was attached to someone she had just brutalized the face of. It was attached to someone who didn't see her as the sum of her title. She took the hand and it pulled her up. She could have stood up on her own if she wanted to though. At their full height, he was about a head taller than her. Blood was dripping out of his face and was starting to stain his undershirt. She couldn't tell what he was thinking because of how bad his face was messed up. What could she say? What should she say? Naruto grunted out, holding a finger up. If you say, I'm sorry, I might just have to cut your head off. Her mouth pressed into a line and she hung her head down in shame. Funny, she thought she didn't have any tears left. Her body proved her wrong when a new stream flowed from her eyes. I'm sorry, she mumbled. I'm sorry. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his sternum. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Naruto wrapped an arm around her back and held the muttering girl. It's okay, I know you are. Kurotsuchi cried into his chest softly. Gone were the choking sobs. In their place was a quiet somberness. She wouldn't be able to tell because of the blood on his face, but Naruto was crying too. It's okay, he mumbled. It's okay. Oh 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 oh. Yugito looked at Kurotsuchi's room with an even expression. Almost everything in the room sans the bed had been torn up, splattered with paint, and thrown about haphazardly. She'd already seen it a few times and had even thought of tidying it up a little bit, but she always held off on doing so. It wasn't like she owed the girl anything. She got on her nerves, in fact. The room stank of acrylic, so she took a deep breath in the hallway before stepping in. She got to the closet and opened the door, revealing orange tracksuits that had been torn to shreds and brutalized. Right under them were a pair of clothes completely covered in paint. Yugito could only assume those were the ones that Kurotsuchi had body flickered into administration wearing. The tall woman turned around and looked at the rest of the room. God, that girl had a temper. That was dangerous. How was such an excitable girl still be alive in her profession? Finding out you were marrying the son of the man who killed your mother or not, some displays of emotion were far too much. Yugito shook her head, allowing the air trapped in her lungs to escape through her nose. She really hoped there were a pair of pajamas laying around somewhere for Naruto to use. She wasn't much for the idea of sleeping with him in the buff. Oh my, young kitten. For you to toy with the notion. Yugito took a page out of Tsunade's handbook and pinched her nose to stem the oncoming headache that came with dealing with her demon. Could you please not do this right now? She could hear an exaggerated sigh come from her mind. Oh, if you insist. I still don't see why you won't see him as a potential bedmate. I don't know, Yugito bit back sarcastically. Maybe it's because I've known him for less than 2 days, tried to kill him in that time, almost succeeded in killing him, practically carried him back here when he covered for me, and maybe also the fact that he's a decade my junior. That about sum it up. Matabi clicked her tongue. All I hear are excuses. He's a ravaging young man. You have to sink your claws in him before someone else does. Yugito closed the door behind her with an air of finality. I'm fine on my own, thank you very much. Oh, honey, I think we both know that isn't true. The woman walked downstairs just in time to see Fu fly into the house through the door excitedly. The girl briefly relayed to the large party taking up the living room that she had seen the 2 people being hunted in question sitting down and talking in a training field. A collective sigh of relief swept through the house and Fu flitted off to relay the information to the few individuals still actively searching for the 2. Yugito shook her head and sat down at the kitchen table, passively looking at the various heads of state and harem members try to begin conversation. It was awkward and weird. She didn't want any part of it. Yugito, can I talk to you? Yugito scrunched her eyebrows together. Matabi never referred to her as anything other than kitten. Well, she didn't anymore. Back when they were still hostile, Matabi often used more choice words, but those days were long past. Yugito nodded and crossed her legs over themselves, working herself into a meditative pose. As soon as she closed and opened her eyes, she was in front of the giant 2-tailed demon death cat, Matabi. The bars holding her back were gone, though the process through which they went away wasn't exactly the norm. Then again, there wasn't really any set norm to speak of. There was the ideal way, which is how be managed, and there was the way one does when one fails the ideal way, which is how Yugito manages. Matabi got up on all fours and began pacing around. You know I worry about you kitten. Yugito sighed and nodded along with the cat speaking. Yes, I know. And you know how I'm worried about how you don't have any friends. Yugito shifted her weight to her back foot, crossed her arms over her chest, and quirked a brow. I have friends. B's students don't count. What about Daru? I's personal bodyguards don't count either. Well, what a boo. Teammates you occasionally go on missions with don't count either. Yugito bit the inside of her cheek. The past few years, Things had been getting better for her. The villagers had stopped treating her with downright animosity about 10 years ago, when she was around 20 or so, and she had worked hard enough and often enough that their indifference began to slowly switch over to respect and/or admiration. That being said, she never developed a personality that one might consider sociable throughout all those years. She was almost the complete opposite of the other Jinchuriki of her village, who treated everything with a perceived flippancy and became friends with everyone. The Jinchuriki sighed. "Why did you call me here?" she asked, cutting straight to the chase. "I think you know why I called you here. If you're just going to parrot back to me what you've already said, I might as well go back and get myself something to eat. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." Matabi walked around her to block off the exit and sat down, shaking the ground, unbalancing Yugito a little bit. "I was having fun. Perhaps that's my fault, but I truly am serious. You have a good chance here. Try to connect. Why don't you? Why not learn a little bit about the guy you're sleeping with? Can't hurt." Yugito sighed as she bent her knees and rocketed into the air, vaulting straight over Matabi's monolithic body and landing in between the giant cat's tails. "Even when you're being serious, you can't be serious," she said, already beginning to stalk off into the hallway. "Yugito," Matabi called back with a slight air of agitation. The woman stopped mid-stride. "I'll talk to him," she said without looking back. "But I'm not making any promise." Oh. Yugito snapped open her eyes and planted her feet on the ground. Her entire body tensed up and searched the surrounding for what was wrong. Fu, who had tapped her on the forehead, backed off suddenly with both palms facing forward. "Whoa, sorry about that," Fu said with wide open eyes. Yugito let her body relax and leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "What time is it?" she asked. "I think it's about 8-ish. Naruto and Kurotsuchi are almost back. You were like that for a while, so I was checking if you were okay." Yugito waved her off with one hand and rubbed her eyes with the other. Talking while in the mindscape was always a crapshoot for her. Hours could be seconds and seconds could be hours. For all her experience with it, she could never anticipate how time would progress outside of the mindscape. Looked like this time, it was around 6 or 7 hours. "It's fine. Dinner." Fu pointed to the kitchen counter, which had more than a few microwavables stacked on top of each other. Evidently, there had been a feast while she was talking to Matabi, if the amount of boxes were of any indication. "Everybody gone?" she asked. "Mei and Temari are getting some sleep. I think Naruto and Kurotsuchi should be here soon. The rest of the cage are gone." Yugito got up and started scrounging around in the kitchen for a few leftover bites. Her body still ached from the morning and there was nothing more she wanted to do than to fall into bed and call it an early day. "So, Fu started off unsurely, jumping up slightly to sit on the edge of the counter. "Why are you awake anyway?" Yugito asked through a mouthful of still warm macaroni. "I mean, you had let's call it a big morning. You've been groggy all day. Why are you still awake?" Yugito shrugged. "I'm not falling asleep before Naruto." Fu tilted her head. "Why? We are sleeping together. I need to set some ground rules." Fu's eyebrows shot up to her hairline. "Excuse me." Yugito rolled her eyes. "We're sleeping in the same bed. All the other rooms are taken and mine has a queen bed, so he's sleeping with me. Sides, he's already slept there this morning." Fu whistled to the side. "You sure about that?" she asked, wincing a little bit. Yugito let her tired eyes trace back to the lithe girl. "Why wouldn't I be? Well, I mean, he and Kurotsuchi seemed pretty close on the way back. I was thinking that they'd be in the same bed. It is bigger after all." Yugito didn't quite know how to react to that information. She didn't have too much time to ponder what it meant, as the two subjects of conversation opened the door and walked inside slowly, both wrapped in a thick layer of tension and high-octane emotions. "Hey guys," Fu said as loudly as she dared with sleeping ninjas above her. "Get everything worked out. Kurotsuchi looked down and to the side and Naruto gripped the back of his neck. Yeah, I guess. A pregnant silence filled the room. Everyone expected everyone else to fill the silence with their own thoughts. So, Fu started off unsurely. How is the bed situation going to work? Kurotsuchi's eyes widened and a red blush stained her face. The room, she gasped out. Fu was quick to respond with, "Oh, but don't worry, Temari cleaned up the room." Or, well, as best she could. There's no salvaging the clothes, though. Sorry. Wait, what happened? Naruto asked. Kurotsuchi started. I threw a tantrum when I changed my clothes. Yugito smirked, remembering the scene she had walked into. Yeah, unless you have a ceiling scroll full of clothes up your somewhere, you're going to need to go shopping tomorrow. Naruto sighed and looked at his present state of dress. And I'm also going to need help with the tar. Kurotsuchi was quick to shake her head. It's not real tar. It should rinse off with water. Naruto sighed in relief. That's good. I thought I was going to be up for hours wiping this shit off me, he said, ending in a grin with a few huffs of laughter. Kurotsuchi let a small smile show through, which she was quick to stamp down. It's been a long day, she said. I'm going to bed. Before she could take 2 steps, Naruto stepped forward and grabbed her shoulder. "Aw, wait," he said quickly. She turned around to look him in the eyes, to which he blushed a little bit. Would you want me to come with you to bed?" Yugito and Fu shared a look while Kurotsuchi shook her head. "No," she said. "I need time to be alone." Fu hopped off the ledge of the counter and bounced her way to Naruto as they both watched Kurotsuchi dart upstairs together. She made a long whistling sound. "So, are you two, together now?" Naruto's unfocused face scrunched up in confusion. "Huh?" he asked, looking down on Fu. Fu backpedaled on that question wildly. "No, it's just that, you two were gone for a while. A really long time. And you just asked if it good to sleep with her." Naruto's face stayed scrunched in confusion for a few more seconds before a bright red blush took over his face. "And no, I didn't mean it like that." As the young teen started to babble on about the confusion that just happened, Yugito finished whatever she was eating and walked up to the two of them. "Okay, that's enough," she said. "Get showered and go to bed. There's a long day tomorrow." Naruto's shoulders sagged downwards. "What is it now?" "We're starting our trek towards sand. It should take a few days, but it doesn't hurt to start things off with a good night's sleep." Naruto pulled at his clothes. They were covered in blood, sweat, and black tar. He really wished there was another guy in the house he could borrow the clothes of right then and there. Yugito clapped him on the back. "You can borrow some of my clothes," she said, guessing his thoughts. "They double as pajamas anyways, so it's not like it matters." His blush renewed. Before he could protest, Yugito pushed him towards the stairs and followed after him, saying, "It's not like we have much of any other option. You're not sleeping in the buff. Not when I'm in the bed too." "Wait, which bed am I sleeping in?" Naruto asked. Honestly, things were just so confusing to him in those moments. "Mine," Yugito said simply, starting to step up the stairs. "I can take the couch." "You're not taking the couch when you can sleep in a bed. I still owe you and I'm not letting it go." "Owe me for what?" "For almost killing you this morning." Naruto opened his mouth to argue back, but his words got caught in his throat. "It's been a long day, hasn't it?" he finally settled on. She clicked her tongue in agreement. Oh. You couldn't have worn something." Yugito sighed and leaned her head back against the headboard. In her hands were a pair of knitting needles clacking away at a blue scarf she'd been working on for a few months now. It wasn't a particularly difficult pattern, it was just that she was normally too busy to work on it with any regularity. Despite the fact that if anybody saw her working with yarn they'd come to the immediate conclusion that it had to do with her more cat-like tendencies, Yugito was ultimately glad she had the distraction available to her. Sometimes it was better knowing you had a hobby than it was actually practicing the hobby. Is there a mute button on you? Yugito quipped back. She was wearing the underparts of the second pair of clothes she brought. They were practically a pair of pajamas, with the slight deviation of being resistant towards stabbing. I'm sure that other woman has some on her. What was her name again? May. I think that was it. Anyways, she looks like the type to schlep around lingerie no matter where she goes. You know, just in case. Yugito busied herself with entangling a knot from the yarn she was working with. And just how do you expect that conversation would go? Oh, hey, I know we don't know each other and we're from previously, at war, nations, but I'd really appreciate it if I could borrow your underwear. Why do I need it? Well, I plan to seduce a person half my age. Yes, it's the one you're thinking of. Oh yes, and the more skin showing the better. Matabi chortled out a few strangled huffs of laughter. And here I was thinking you didn't have a sense of humor. Just a strong sense of sarcasm. Witty too. You flatter me. Matabi settled down and laid her head on her paws. Baby steps, I suppose. Still though, it's rather brazen of you to offer him your unwashed clothes as a replacement of his own. Yugito laughed a little, getting back to a row of stitches on the scarf. Yeah, right, she muttered. Matabi cracked open a single, interested eye. You respond as if you think I was joking. You were, though. I wasn't. Yugito looked up from the stitches into nothingness. Wait, I washed those clothes. You plan to wash those clothes. Yugito's eyes went wide as saucers. Oh, shit. Before she could jump up and switch out the clothes she left behind for Naruto wear, the door opened slightly before stopping barely an inch ajar. Oh, sorry, are you decent? Naruto asked. Yugito gulped down the spit in her mouth. Yeah. As the door opened more fully, Naruto walked in, pulling at the hem of his shirt and looking generally uncomfortable. Although she was a little bit taller than him, his physique was wider by a significant proportion. The clothing stretched around his torso so much that it was practically a second skin, showing off the burgeoning muscle definition he had been maintaining. Despite her dry mouth, Yugito felt the need to gulp again. Ground rules, then. Why was she stammering? He wasn't the first cut male she had seen in her life. But seeing him straining against her clothes with a slightly demure attitude and a downturned gaze made her throat stumble over itself. Naruto nodded, grabbing one of his elbows with one hand and pulling the hem down as far as it could go with the other. Yugito gulped again. No spooning, no cuddling, we share the blanket, and look the other way. Naruto nodded silently again and approached the bed slowly. Yugito got herself comfortable and turned away from him, closing her eyes already. He turned off the lamp light and got under the blanket next to her. She stilled her breathing and tried to will herself to sleep. Her body was tired and so was her mind. By all means, she should have been out like a light by the time her head hit the pillow. That didn't happen though. She stayed awake through the seconds which turned to minutes which turned to tens of minutes. The fact of the matter was that she couldn't fall asleep, no matter what she tried. She was too nervous. Hey, Yugito, are you awake? Naruto whispered under his breath. At least she wasn't the only one not getting any sleep. Yeah, she said with her full voice. Having trouble falling asleep. She could hear the crinkling of the sheets as he nodded. Yeah, he said, I think I'm thinking too much. I'm tired, but my brain won't turn off. Yugito took a deep breath and sat back up in bed, reaching over to turn on a lamp light. She had to wince away the stars that showed up in her vision from the sudden brightness, but once they were away, she turned her head to her bedmate. Do you want to talk about it? Naruto sat up quickly and pressed his back to the headboard. How old are you? 29. He nodded. Right. Sue, have you ever been, in love, before? Yugito took a while to answer. Unknown to him, that was a hard question to her. One she'd rather not think about, dwell on, and especially not verbalize to someone she had just met. Once, she said finally. And what did it feel like? Yugito leaned her head back and looked into nothing. It felt like the best thing I could describe. No, it was so great that I couldn't even begin to describe it. But Naruto couldn't look her in the eyes. How did you know? Yugito shrugged and laughed a pitiful laugh. How could I not? I think I was a little bit older than you are now when he talked to me. Nobody had ever talked to me before like he did. It was like, he cared about me. But, he cared about me, not the fact that I was powerful or a Jinchuriki. Until that point I had told myself that I was probably going to be alone forever. Nobody would understand me. Nobody would love me. But then he did. Yugito's voice cracked. She shouldn't talk anymore. Why was she talking in the first place anyway? She didn't want these memories anymore. What happened? Is he still around? Yugito shook her head. She didn't cry about it anymore, but it was always hard to talk about. No, he's dead. Naruto was struck into silence. Oh, I'm sorry for your loss. She couldn't help the blackened laughter bubbling from her lips. My loss? You misunderstand. I was in love with him for all of 2 days. Just long enough to tell him I love him. Just long enough for him to take advantage of me and throw me away. Just long enough to be treated like a trophy. For a few moments, the only thing audible in the room was the sound of their breathing. Naruto didn't know what to say and Yugito didn't feel like saying anything. Again, why didn't he know what to say in times like this? He reached out and put a hand on her shoulder. I won't pity you. Yugito first looked at his hand, then traced it up to his face, landing on his eyes last. His eyes were earnest. They were uncertain and trying to understand everything, but failing everywhere they went. It's just that, he continued on. You're, like, the most kick-ass person I've ever met. And I've met a lot of kick-ass people. You're a Jinchuriki like me, but you've mastered your tailed beast. You've been alone for a long time, but you grit your teeth and you persevered. You're also strong, stronger than I am at least. Strong enough that I had to trick you to even get on even footing. And even then, you blew me away. The more I learn about you, the more I respect you. Yugito looked him up and down a few times. He's smiling now. Not a particularly big or intense smile. Not a smile that held hidden pity. It was a real smile. He was trying to understand her. And that was so much more than anyone had ever done for her. So even if people were to you in the past, you'll get through it. Because you're strong. And if it helps at all, then at least know this, we're always going to be together. From now on till death do us part. And it feels good to know that I'm bound together with such a great person. Her hand shakily fell on top of his on her shoulder and squeezed his fingers. They were brought down to her lap where she clasped the other around them. A few droplets of moisture from her eyes wetted them and made them slippery. Why did what he said feel so good? He wasn't a wordsmith or a poet. He wasn't in love with her and he wasn't trying to console her. It was just that he spoke from the bottom of his heart. And she really liked that. She sniffled once and only once. Wiping the tears off on her shoulder, she gulped down the knot in her throat and looked back at the man whose hand she was holding. Thanks, she said, showing off a rare smile. And if you think you're in love with Kurotsuchi, then you probably are. I think that's just the way it is. Then again, I don't really know any other way. His cheeks burned up a little and he brought his attention downwards. We talked together for hours. A lot about nothing. Just the things we went through. What an average day was like, favorite colors, best friends, what we were trying to do. I want to talk to her more. I want to get to know her more, but. The woman pulled his arm towards her until she could wrap her arms around his shoulders and put her chin on top of his head. But I get the same feeling when I'm with Fu and when I'm with you. I actually really like being around you guys. And I want to do it more. Is that weird? How can that be love? Yugito took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Who knows? Maybe it is love. But you can love people in different ways. Nothing has to be romantic or physical. You'll only really know for sure when you're in the moment. Naruto pressed his ear against her chest. He could hear her heartbeat. It was slow and steady and loud, like a drum beating consistently, keeping the entire world to its proper rhythm. He fell asleep against that chest. All his troubles seemed to slip away, brought into line by that beating and made to seem unimportant. Yugito leaned back against the pillows and closed her eyes as well. Neither of them dreamed much that night. They slept deeply and soundly, tucked in the embrace of each other's arms. Temari would be lying if she said she didn't have any more reservations about the harem contract. In fact, she was still downright skeptical of it. But seeing that no one had cut off anybody's head as of yet, there might be a chance that everything could work out for the good. Of course, things could all go sideways at a moment's notice, but for the right now, things were looking up. She knew she wasn't much of a cook, but even so, she was doing her best making omelets. She even diced up some meat and greens to go with a few of them. Part of that had to do with wanting the morning to roll out as quickly and efficiently as possible, and another part had to do with the tinge of nervousness she felt at knowing the 5 other members would be getting comfy in her house for a few days after they made it to Sand. Kankuro liked his space, and if anyone infringed on it, things would get dicey. Gaara was much better than he had ever been, but she had also never tried his patience and she didn't want to find what might happen if she did. These are really good. Temari turned slightly to see Fu munching on one of the omelets she made with meat in the middle. There was a happy, somewhat sleep-hazy look on her face. It would appear that she had just gotten up if her tussed-up hair were any indication. It was also only 6 in the morning, so that was a good sign too. Thanks, Temari said. You nervous? Her hand reflexively tightened on the spatula. About what? Fu lifted her head and started paying more attention to the girl from Sand. We're all going to your home. I'm sorry if I assumed. No, it's fine, Temari said as she breathed out. It just all feels so weird, you know. Word probably hasn't reached them yet, so all the people I talk to, all my superiors, peers, and subordinates, they're all going to know that I'm a member of a harem. And that's a little. Fu chuckled a little bit. Oh, come on. It's not like you're a mind-controlled drone in a secret cult. You're a symbol. And when they start feeling the benefits, I'm sure everyone's going to be looking at you a lot differently. Temari took another deep breath and folded the omelet on the stove. Her free hand's index finger was tapping the counter rhythmically. I guess you're right. Makes me feel kinda silly for feeling nervous. You're not silly. You just don't know what to feel. I don't either, by way. I don't think anyone does, actually. It's not like there's a precedent for harems. How wise, May said, coming around the corner with her usual airy smile. Despite your youth, you don't appear quite so excitable as others in this contract. And there was the remaining skepticism. Any free time she had yesterday was taken up when May had decided she didn't have enough clothes to wear, then when she was out of makeup, then when she was out of underwear, then when she needed to stock back up on her sweets and had practically forced Temari to tag along in order to give a second opinion, try the food, or to help carry the bags. Perhaps May wasn't an actively terrible person, but the decidedly carefree manner in which she behaved rubbed Temari in such a wrong way that she was practically always holding her tongue from lashing the older woman, reminding herself that she was very much weaker than May every time the urge appeared and that it wouldn't do the contract any good to provoke the woman. Temari turned around with a little bit of apprehension, but allowed it go away once she realized May was at least weak.